Hey guys, Mono here. We finally have some new information from the Hella Loose devs coming to us in this developer briefing, which is titled Our Focus for the Remainder of 2023. This one is pretty long and it's filled with a lot of news and changes to the plans of Hella Loose during the next few years. So it is extremely interesting and important. One thing about this debrief is that it goes over a lot of player feedback, a lot of community concerns that have been raised both on Discord, on the Steam reviews, putting it at mostly negative for the past month, discussions that have been raised on the suggestions chat on the Discord, on Reddit, and basically everywhere in video comments, you name it. So regardless of your opinion on the dev team, on the current / new dev team that this game has, I think we gotta give them props for listening to the community, because every single part of this debrief addresses something that the community has brought up and some issue that the game has or has been introduced to the game recently. So the biggest news here is that the roadmap for 2023 is basically invalid now. What they're gonna do is put that roadmap on hold and focusing on bringing more maps for the standard game modes. So they're pushing back the calendar regarding the release of the new game modes, and they are going to be focusing on maps for Warfare and Offensive for 100 players, and they will continue to work resolving as many bugs as possible. And they say here, and begin planning for the long-term future of Hella Loose alongside the community. So that puts us in a situation where we don't have a roadmap right now, because they don't have a roadmap either, which I regard as a good thing, because they are going to be focusing on the actual issues that the game has instead of planning for content that disregards the problems, right? So first thing they say is the player locomotion speed and the dive to prone are getting reverted. Like, that's happening, guys. I know there's a split in the community regarding whether if the new running speed is good or not. I'm very much in the camp that I don't think it's good. Like, don't get me wrong, I enjoy being able to run faster in the game because it feels good, but I don't think it makes the game better. I don't think it affects the gameplay in a positive way. So what they're going to do is they're going to have a PTE on July 20th to test the removal of both the locomotion increase or the sprint speed increase, as well as the dive to prone. So I guess they're going back to the old dive to prone, which was very janky in a way, but I think it's a good compromise. Maybe they can tweak the new dive to prone to be somewhere in between, as well as the sprint speed. I wouldn't be against the sprint speed maybe being like 4% faster than it originally was, not 15% or maybe 20% as some players have measured it. But what they're going to do is they're going to carry out a PTE before the adjustments can be confirmed for patch 14.2. So they are working on two patches right now, 14.2 and 14.3. They are going to be delivering more frequent patches in the future instead of big, massive updates every like 2 months or 3 months or whatever. So that, I think, again, is a very positive news. And they also acknowledge this player divide in the community, saying, we understand that there are members of the Hella Loose community who will be disappointed with the decision to remove the speed increase. However, recent fixes intended to reduce the impact of these changes haven't been as successful as we hoped. So probably what they are referring to there is the zigzagging, which, when you think about it, the zigzagging speed has been doubled, because when you go from one side to the other, that 15% increase gets multiplied, right? So the change in speed from one direction to the other is actually increased by 30%, which is very significant. And they tried to reduce this problem by having this acceleration thing going on, so that when you do a sharp turn to the left or to the right, you are slowed down. However, that doesn't really work for the zigzagging, because it is just confined to a very, very severe angle, while if you manage to zigzag without basically going over that angle, you can still do it and it works fine. I've been having a couple of games where I've been out in the open, started getting shot at. I would have died in the previous versions of the game, and I definitely didn't die by just zigzagging my way to success. But I also think the next sentence is extremely important, saying these fixes led to further investigations to be carried out to understand the deeper components of Hella Loose, including vehicles, and how these currently affect our ability to make balancing tweaks without impacting the wider game. So I think this is an acknowledgement that when they thought about increasing the sprint speed, they didn't actually consider the impact that would have in the wider overall gameplay of the game, because they found out basically together with the community that now heavy tanks can't outrun infantry, and that creates a huge amount of problems, as well as the tank rotation speed not being good enough to outrun a AT guy that is running on your back, trying to get that second shot into your backside. That used to be something that you could do in a tank if you were fast enough with your reaction and started moving right away. But now basically you can no longer do that. And of course, it just makes the tanks weaker in general. And that would lead to a bunch of changes that you have to make, like increasing the turret speed rotation and increasing the tank rotation, the tank speed. But then you run into the issue that the heavy tanks are too fast compared to the medium, so you have to increase the medium ones. And again, I am not opposed in theory to those changes if they benefit the gameplay, which I don't think they do, because I do like the slow-paced nature of this game and the fact that running in the open very much means dying most of the time if there are enemies shooting at you. But regardless, if the devs were to change all those gears in the gameplay, they should do so with some testing involved, because you're basically changing the entire game. And you have to understand what it is exactly that you're doing, right? What impact it will have. And you can't just make a change like increasing the run speed and not assess those changes properly. Now, a lot of people are going to say like, oh, everyone's making it seem like the sprint speed was the only problem, and that's like the major problem the game has, and that's the reason for the negative reviews on Steam and whatever. I don't think that's the case. I do think it is the most noticeable thing with the game right now. I think the negative reviews are a result of the past few updates. So they mention here the British forces, right? The British forces were introduced and they were completely underwhelming for several reasons, right? The guns were broken, the animations on them were different from all the other teams with a lot more sway, the tanks are underperforming. So there's a lot of reasons to not like the British forces and not like the recent patches. But I'm getting ahead of myself because they did mention that the Brecourt map, which was the map for the new objective game mode, the release of that map will be moved back. They don't know when they are going to release that game mode or that map. They will do a BTE to test that game mode at some point in the future, but they are unwilling to share. They probably just don't know when they're going to be able to do that because they are changing that focus to fixing the issues that the game has. So now moving on to the British forces, they acknowledge that they were underwhelming, and they go into some detail on why it's not as easy to fix as some people would think. Because, for example, when they change the animations or the weapon sway, that also changes other aspects. So they need to actually put in a lot more work to rebalance some of the items, they say, from the ground up. So I don't know what that looks like in terms of the dev work needed to do in terms of the animation department or the game logic programming or whatever, but they do want to have everything figured out and working as intended for patch 14.3, which is going to be the second patch starting from this dev brief. And again, they mentioned a BTE will be held in advance of that patch to test those British forces, which I think the inclusion of the PTE testing is invaluable. It is what they need to do, both to receive that player feedback before the update goes live, but also to have players test the update and set their expectations of what is working and what isn't. Because in previous PTEs, we would find out some problems, some major problems with the game. Some of those would be resolved, some wouldn't by the time that the update went live, but at least you knew that they were coming with the update. So you were ready to say like, okay, they did this testing, they know this is busted, they are working on it, right? Before the update even goes live. Maybe they push the update with those issues. It doesn't matter. What matters, I think, is knowing that those problems exist, and they certainly know that here. With patch 14.3, they are also adding a basic training environment, which is going to be a couple of video tutorials, which is long overdue, and a reworked field manual. I hope they consult us, the content creators for this game that have already done a lot of video tutorials for this game in terms of what we think are the most important aspects for, teaching new players, because we do have some experience with that, both me and other YouTubers. And they are also adding a practice range, which seems like a dream come true. I don't think I would use the practice range much, maybe to test new weapons and stuff like that. But previously, this was thought as, they just can't do this because of the way the game works with the servers and whatnot. And it seems like that was a limitation that the previous dev team, Black Matter, had with the game. And it seems like this new dev team figured out a way to actually solve that issue, and they are adding a practice range for the US forces only, apparently, for this update 14.3. Obviously, other forces will be added in the future, but that's what we get right now. Regarding the in-game store, what they're saying is, they know that this is an issue with players, that some part of the community says like, oh, they are just focusing on selling more DLC instead of actually having a good game. And what they're saying here is like, yes, we understand that. We do have to release this in-game store anyway, because not doing it would cause further issues in the production of the next patches and updates for the game. So they are just clarifying that, they are going to release that store. It's not ever going to have pay-to-win items, and it's not going to offer non-historical cosmetics that break immersion, for example, pink camouflage, which I actually never doubted because it's just not that type of game. But it's good that they're saying this, and it's good that they are aware that, it's a bad look to release an in-game store when the game is not at its best state currently. So they are aware of that, and, they are clarifying that. All right, now on to bug fixing. And they say, moving back the timeline for the record map and the new objective game mode, they are working on predominantly tackling the following bugs. So the in-game stutter, the Panther reload speed, which I'm not sure what that is. Maybe Fresh Baked has a better idea of that. I haven't used the Panther recently, so I really don't know. The Sherman Firefly frontal damage, basically being a medium armor instead of being a heavy armor. They're going to change that. The British gun sights, the British weapon sway, the fire rate, the bolt animation. So basically everything about the British, including correctly zeroing in the British weapons, which again, I love that they know that they have received the feedback and they read it and acknowledged like, yes, okay, there is a zeroing issue. Hopefully they are able to fix it, because last time they tried fixing it, they didn't. But, with this new effort and this new focus for the dev team, I hope they do. The doubled explosion VFX, which has been in the game for a drastically long time and has made every video that I've ever recorded that features an explosion just an eyesore to see, because it looks so bad. But that's hopefully going away with update 14.3. And just a few more, like servers missing for the server browser, which is a huge problem that the game has and has had for quite some time. The missing weapon audio for the Xbox, and adding ultra widescreen support. Now, I think this following section is really interesting because they dive a bit deeper into what makes these bugs so difficult to fix. And basically, I'm not going to read all of this, but what they're saying is these are hard to recreate. We couldn't recreate them and never could recreate them in the build version that they have of the game. But when they push that into a live update, into a live build, that somehow manifests the problem. So they are unsure of, why this is happening, but they are working on using the new game analytics as well as the upcoming BTEs to better understand when this issue occurs and why it happens. In the case of the grenade bug, they have managed to reproduce it, so they will be issuing a potential fix in update 14.2 in the PTE. Hopefully that is the case. That is a bug, again, that has persisted for a long time, same as the loadout bug. And next thing is actually really interesting because I don't think anybody knew about this, but they are saying balancing the Axis forces has remained a topic of discussion for some time. I think the German forces are by far the best ones in the game. So I do think there needs to be some balancing. I wonder what their data is on the win rate for the Germans. But this is really interesting. When they were working on update 14, they discovered that the German soldiers had marginally faster acceleration compared to all the other forces, meaning they would just reach that maximum speed just a little bit faster when running or sprinting than the other players. So they are going to tweak that to make it, in line with the other players. I've never noticed that. I've never heard anyone notice this. So that's very interesting. It must be a very marginal thing to go and notice that way for so long. But I do think some balancing needs to be done in a wider sense to the German forces specifically. The way I would approach that would be not to nerf the German forces, but rather to buff the Americans and the Russians. Maybe give them, for example, a faster bolt cycling speed on the rifles for the Russians. Maybe give the American forces a better BAR, for example. That would go a long way if the BAR didn't actually suck, as well as the grease gun, which used to be a headshot machine, and for some reason at some point that changed, and now it's not as good as it used to be. I wouldn't be opposed either to giving the American bazooka 3 rockets instead of 2, given the massive difference in damage that they have. Like the German Panzerschreck can penetrate medium armor, while the American can't. So as American AT, you are basically forced to hit tanks in the ass if you want to take them down, while as Germans, you can hit any tank in the game from the side and do damage to it. So that's a, very significant difference. I do enjoy those asymmetric stuff, like those differences, but they obviously have to be balanced in some way. Next up, console server browsing. The short of it is that the way the game is coded on console is different from the way it is on PC, and they can't actually add server browsers the way it is currently coded. So they have to do a lot of work to add server browsers, to add that functionality to consoles, and they are going to work on it, but it's going to take more time than they thought it would, or than I think anyone thought it would. All right, new maps and DLC coming in 2023. I really don't care about the DLC uniforms or anything, so I'm going to just skip over that. They are going to add a new map variant for Saint-Marie du Mont. It's going to be a night version of the game. That's going to release with patch 14.3, so it should be coming fairly recently. And they're also going to host a Reddit AMA session, which is going to be pretty spicy, I think, as well as maybe a podcast with Rasbora and the Fresh Baked Goods on their podcast, which I believe will be very interesting. Next up, we have some information about the BTEs regarding their dates and when they're going to be held and what they're going to be looking into. So, for example, the 14.2 is going to be looking mostly into the movement changes, testing if the grenade bug fix actually works, and they are going to try and capture more data surrounding the loadout bug. And the next BTE will aim at, taking a look at the British forces before patch 14.3, as well as a PTE for the night version of SMDM. And lastly, they talk about server performance, rubber banding, stuttering, and game analytics. And the gist of this is that they have been implementing some fixes to the rubber banding on some servers. They have tested that already on some PC servers. They have had good results, and they will continue to investigate this issue, as well as rolling out that change to all of the servers. In terms of the stuttering, basically what they say is that because there is this floating point error sometimes in basically any program where the math can break down due to some rounding errors that basically compound over time as you run the game, the fix that was implemented for Hell Loose was to re-zero the map around you and all of the objects, because apparently that would fix the math or restart the math in some way and, make it stable so you didn't get any visual glitches like the trees, going off to infinity and stuff like that, or the wheat field, which I've experienced myself in recent games. And what they say is that rebuilding of the world, which they call world origin rebasing, that process is very, very expensive in terms of compute time. So that causes some stutters sometimes. And that's been in the game since forever, but now they've increased the rate for that because of some issues with the British weapons. So that happens more often, making it more noticeable. I've definitely noticed more stuttering lately. So what they're going to do is basically work on a way to eliminate that issue entirely. They're going to slightly reduce the frequency, but they are going to work on a way to remove that from the game because they believe that is the root cause of several bugs. So they are going to try and solve that math problem in an entirely different way. So that's good news, I guess. The game analytics, basically what they say here is that the game analytics do not impact server performance. I thought that they did, that, maybe that's why servers were stuttering so much, because they had introduced new game analytics. That is not the case because they run after the match has ended. So, it does not impact the game. And that's basically it, guys. I think this is a really good debrief. It goes into detail on a lot of the issues that the game has right now, as well as the player feedback that they've received. Now we have to look at whether or not they're going to be able to do this, whether or not they're going to be able to fix those problems, whether or not they're going to be able to roll back the speed increase and not cause other issues and stuff like that. But it's good to know that they are going to start implementing PTEs in a very, let's say, aggressive way, basically running a PTE for every major change to the game. I think that is definitely the right course, because just, testing and receiving player feedback for those tests is just what you need to do, right? And again, going back to the sprint speed issue, I think some players will be disappointed with that change. I very much welcome it. I didn't enjoy the way it changed the game, and I think a lot of players underestimate how much that 15% speed increase changed the way the game plays. I have found myself doing things that I wouldn't have done before, such as, just taking more distance to flank, or checking areas for garrisons that previously would have been too far away, or it just changed the dynamic of the game, I think, in a way that I don't think is beneficial to the gameplay that the game had, and which I greatly enjoyed. So yeah, again, I'm not opposed to them changing it, to like 5% increase or something, but hopefully if they decide to, change it again or something, they will run a PTE and see what happens and what the player feedback is, because that is obviously extremely important. All right, guys. Let me know what you think down in the comment section. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope I will catch you in the next one.